Thanks everyone for coming out today. I'm going to talk for about 40 minutes and then leave some time for questions after that. So first I wanted to tell you a little bit, doing what I want, about the Applied Economics Clinic. We just started last year, and we are housed at the Global Development and Environment Institute down right here on the Tufts campus, but we're an independent nonprofit, and we have 4 professional staff, that's us, that are economists, engineers, and other related fields, as well as hiring RAs each year. So we've been hiring RAs each semester and during the summer since we started. Most of those are grad students. We have 1 undergrad, and we're encouraging people to apply in May for our summer RA ships, and then probably in August for fall RA ships. Our mission is to provide low and, when it's possible, free expert services, mostly to environmental and consumer and other kinds of equity advocates. So these are advocacy groups that are going out and doing their missions, and we can often provide them with assistance that helps them in that work. So we don't invent our research projects on our own. We look to our clients and the folks that we work with to say, what do they need? And then we try to provide them with that analysis, that report, that testimony. That's the applied part. We're also working to train a new generation of technical experts, and it's our hope that that new generation will be more diverse than the current generation. And we're doing our best with a small nonprofit to make a difference in that as well. We do testimony, we do reports, analysis, modeling, all of these things. And the topic today is pipeline economics. So I thought I'd talk a little bit about some of the things that we've done over the years before we started the clinic, and then during our time with the clinic as well, that are related to pipelines. More generally, we do work on energy, the environment, and equity, and that can mean a lot of things. A lot of our work is on the electric sector and on the natural gas sector. Those 2 things make up most of our work, and most of our work is focused here in the United States. And it's an exciting time to be doing electric and natural gas sector work in the United States. People ask me about, with the new administration, is that obstacle to that kind of work? Perhaps the way I like to look at it is that it has really energized the work that's going on at the state level. There is so much going on at the state level right now in terms of these advocacy groups trying to make a difference, change regulations, change laws, and then looking to us when they can for technical expertise. It's a busy time to be an environmental economist. Of not just myself, but the other professional staff also of the clinic, we've put in expert testimony regarding pipelines in Massachusetts and in Pennsylvania. We've done analysis and modeling on the pipelines proposed to come into Massachusetts and New England, as well as several pipelines in the Southeast. And then an issue with pipelines also bringing natural gas into New York. These are a couple of recent reports that we've worked on, one related to the Atlantic Coast Pipeline, which is in the Southeast, looking at taking a critical look at claims that this would provide lots of manufacturing jobs. And then a recent one that was looking critically at some claims that Con Ed, the largest electric utility in New York, its customers, its electric customers, would receive wonderful benefits in reduced electric rates if Con Ed signed on to a contract to get supply of natural gas from a new pipeline. And so we're looking critically at that as well to say, do these benefits really exist? Will this really benefit what they call ratepayers, which means the electric customers of Con Ed? I'm also working right now to finish up some testimony that I'm doing for Conservation Law Foundation here in Massachusetts. So right now in Massachusetts, the 4 natural gas distributors, so now I'm not talking about electric anymore, I'm talking about the folks that are bringing natural gas to homes and businesses in Massachusetts that we use to heat our homes, heat water, industrial purposes. Those for distributors or utilities, they are currently asking permission of Massachusetts Department of Public Utilities, our utility commission, to sign new contracts with natural gas pipelines. And in that moment, in that asking permission, it becomes like a court case. Each one of those moments of asking permission becomes like a court case. It's not held in front of a criminal or civil judge. Instead, it's held in front of the utility commission itself. But the way that it plays out is a lot like a legal case, court case, with lawyers on both sides and witnesses and the whole thing. And so those are happening right now. Those 4 utilities applied for permission to do this, and because utilities often have a monopoly over what it is that they do, delivering gas, delivering electricity, in exchange for that, they are regulated by these utility commissions, and they have to ask permission to do a lot of different things, including this. And they've asked permission to do it, and then Conservation Law Foundation, which is an environmental advocacy group here in New England, has intervened in those cases, meaning they've said, we have something to say about this. This is important to us. It's important to our constituents. We want to get our opinions in here, too. Luckily, the commission, the utility commission, agreed with them and said, yes, we agree with you. You do have standing here. You can come in. You can present witnesses. You can make arguments. That doesn't always happen. And in a lot of natural gas cases in Massachusetts, Conservation Law Foundation and other advocacy groups have been denied standing. And it's been said, no, sorry, this has nothing to do with you. But in this case, they said they have standing, and now I'm writing testimony to talk about 2 things that we're going to get into more when I get to talking in general about pipeline economics. And those are, do we really need these pipelines? Do we need the natural gas from these pipelines or not? And then the other is, let's say we're going to take the natural gas from these pipelines. Is that really consistent with our climate law? Oh, in Massachusetts, we have a strong climate law. It's called the Global Warming Solutions Act. Would taking more gas from these pipelines be consistent with that? And so those are the 2 things that I'm writing about and ultimately will be testifying about. So pipeline economics, more generally, I want to back up and just talk about these ideas. So is it necessary? And is it cost effective? These are the 2 big questions that most often come up about pipelines. Is it necessary? Is it cost effective? Much less so the other question that I'm dealing in my testimony, which is this consistent with our climate laws? That's a much less asked question, but we're going to slip it in here somewhere. Right? So just to give you a preview of where I'm going with this, I'm going to get philosophical on you, as economists often do, and say, what do you mean by necessary, and what do you mean by cost? So that's where we're heading. So necessary could mean a lot of things. Is a pipeline necessary? So the pipeline's going to bring oil or natural gas or some other kind of fossil fuel product from point A to point B. Is it necessary? What does necessary mean? This is a picture of an oil spill that was from an ExxonMobil pipeline in Arkansas that ended up flowing through some neighborhoods. I think I had one before that I didn't mention. This is from, you may have heard of the Keystone Pipeline. This is in South Dakota, and it's undergrounded here. It's underground, and it was leaking oil into this area. So necessary could mean a couple of things. Does it mean this is the only way to meet these energy needs? So I'm not going to disagree that there are energy needs. There are needs for energy. Certainly, different societies around the world consider what is a need and what is just a privilege differently. But the way that our society runs here, and with lots of very cold winter areas that need heating, we have energy needs, right? So is this pipeline, is the stuff that's going to come into the pipeline, the oil, the natural gas, whatever it is it the only way that we could meet those needs? And so the things to think about here are, well, first of all, could we reduce that need? And we're going to talk more about that. Could we reduce the need through energy efficiency, through other kinds of conservation measures where maybe we needed less? So, and then the other thing is, what about renewables? What about other ways to meet energy needs, right? So maybe it's not the only way to meet those needs. Maybe it's the best way to meet those needs. That could be another argument that's made about the pipeline. All right, it's not the only way to meet those needs, but it's the best way. Well, then if a pipeline is going to be put in place, or in Massachusetts, if we're going to sign a contract to take natural gas from that pipeline, then we want to see that defended, right? Why is this the best way to meet those energy needs? Aren't there other ways that we could do this? What do we mean by best? And when we head there, well, that'll be the second question that I asked before, because when they're saying best, usually it means most cost-effective, right? There's two things that come up with best. One is most cost-effective, and we're going to get to that. What's cost, right? And the other is that it's the most reliable. So thinking about natural gas coming into Massachusetts, maybe it's the most cost-effective. We can look at that. Can figure out, are there other things that are more cost-effective than this? The question of whether or not it's the most reliable gets into a really qualitative area. So you could have a different opinion about that than I could, but it's often an argument that's made in proposing and defending either building new pipelines or the use of those pipelines, that it is the most reliable way to bring energy. Maybe, maybe not. I think you could obviously make arguments either way, that renewables are very reliable, that distributed generation, where our generation is coming from lots and lots of places instead of one vulnerable place, that's very reliable, where it doesn't have to pass over as many long transmission lines. Maybe that's very reliable. This doesn't look very reliable when I put these pictures up. So, but that's the argument that's often made about fossil fuels over efficiency, over renewables, is that fossil fuels are more reliable for one reason or another. So maybe necessary means it's the only way that we could get our energy needs met. Maybe it means it's the most cost-effective way that we could get our energy needs met. But if you look at the way that the pipelines, the building of new pipelines is actually argued for and defended, it's usually about this third one. We might talk about it in this other way. We really need it. But what they're saying is there's a market for it. There's a market for this energy product. And so I wanted to take you through how that argument is made. How do we make the argument, if I wanted to make such an argument, that there's a market for, say, this natural gas? Therefore, it's needed. People are asking for it. There's a market for it. So here's how that works. We start with the gas distribution companies. Those are your gas utilities that are bringing the gas to your house. Right? And like I said before, they need to make their case for a lot of things to get permission a lot of times from the State Utility Commission. And one of the things that they do every year or every other year, depending on the state, is they'll file with the commission what's called a forecast and supply plan. And so in that, they make a forecast, they make a prediction of how much natural gas their customers are going to need in the future. So, and that's a thing that economists do, right? We predict the future, we make forecasts about what's going to happen in the future. In part because CLF and other groups are often not getting standing in those forecast and supply plan cases, I've never really done the job of digging and scratching into that and saying, okay, exactly how is this analysis done? With what certainty do we know these numbers, right? They're the forecast of the future. And these forecasts always look, this is true for both natural gas utilities and electric utilities. Forecasts of how much their customers are going to need in the future look like this. Okay. It's going up. Business is good. Customers need more and more. It's always going up. Now, for the electric side, over time and with some humility, the electric utilities have had to lower that slope a little bit because it's just not happening like that anymore. They still say it's going up every single time that they have to issue a forecast like that. It's going up, it's going up. The real answer for New England for electricity is that it's flat. Okay? And if you look at all of the programs that exist in New England for energy efficiency, for renewables and distributed generation in general, and you put that into that forecast, I'd say it was going down slightly for electricity. And that's with economic growth, but we're using it differently, right? But still up, 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 right? And so econometric statistics, data analysis of how things looked in the past is how they justify the idea that it's going to go up, up, up in the future. And for me, I'm much more familiar with those arguments on the electric side. I've looked at a lot of utility requests and forecasts like that for explaining why this is the answer, and found it very questionable. The natural gas utilities do the same thing, up, up, up. So they put in this plan, it says, wow, we're going to need a lot of natural gas in the future. We really are. That's our predicted future need. And also, natural gas, it's necessary. It's really cost effective. That's what we're going to need. Okay? And then they asked permission from the State Utility Commission to sign contracts, supply contracts with pipelines to get access to that natural gas. Okay? And you may remember a few years ago now, this is more like in 2015 going into 2016, that the various utilities in Massachusetts and elsewhere in New England had a new idea about this. Let's not just sign supply contracts, and I'll get to why those are important in a minute, but let's do something else. So the pipelines themselves, when a new pipeline is built, and various pipelines have been proposed for coming into New England, when a pipeline is built, usually private developers put in money on that, and they hope to get money back from, you have to pay to send your natural gas through the pipeline. They hope it's a business arrangement. But the utilities in Massachusetts got the great idea of, what if we could charge the cost of building that pipeline to the electric ratepayers, to the electric customers, which was a new idea. That sounds good, right? Let's charge the electric customers to build the pipeline, and we still get to take the profits from it. That would be wonderful. But after bringing that to the Utility Commission actually gave permission for that. They were then sued by CLF and others. It went through various legal proceedings, and our Supreme Court of Massachusetts said, no, indeed, that's not happening. You may not charge the electric customers for your pipeline. And now we're still cycling back on what's Plan B. So any day now, who knows, the release of whatever Plan B is for getting that pipeline could come out. I don't think it's dead forever, but that was what stopped that series of pipelines then, was the decision that, no, you can't pay for it that way. That's not okay. So, but normally they just pay for it themselves and then hope to get a return on it, or use investors. So anyhow, in this case, the gas utility says, look, we have this need, gets bigger and bigger, right? And natural gas, it's really necessary, it's really cost effective. We're going to ask permission from the State Utility Commission to sign a supply contract, to get that gas. And sometimes they sign contracts like this with pipelines that don't exist yet, and sometimes with pipelines that already exist. The ones in Massachusetts right now, they're with pipes that I'm working on the testimony. Those are with pipelines that already exist. But sometimes they sign supply contracts for pipelines that don't yet exist. Right? Now, it's getting brighter and brighter and harder to see up here. Sorry about that. So now the utility commissions agree, and now there are contracts between the gas distributors saying, we have this need, and the pipeline company. The pipeline company collects the contracts. Right? And they take their pile of contracts to FERC. Right, to the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission. And they say, we'd like to build this pipeline. Look, there's a need for it. Right? And basically, as long as you go to FERC with a stack of supply contracts in hand, they're going to sign off on the permits for that pipeline. Okay? that is how the need is established, is through this chain. So FERC wants to see that the pipeline is needed. The pipeline is needed because we have the supply contracts. We have the supply contracts because the gas distribution companies said need looks like this, right? That's the chain. Why did they say need looks like this? Because they got some economists to run some statistical models that said, well, in the past it's kind of been growing like that, so our best guess is in the future it'll keep growing like that. Okay. So necessary. Is it necessary? There are other ways to meet our energy needs. Make sure that we're looking at those before determining that it's necessary. Is it the best way? We'll get over to cost effective. There's a market for it, I guess. The meaning of there's a market for it was that somebody predicted that there would be a market for it. And then here's another question that's a little bit off from this. Who is it necessary for? So let's say all of that was completely accurate, wonderful crystal ball for predicting the future. It's really, really needed. But who is it needed for? And I think that in following news about controversy and protest regarding pipelines over the past few years, that you probably have seen this line of thought and line of question to say, okay, maybe this pipeline that goes through here over to there is needed over there. I'm not so sure, but maybe it is. But what about us here where the pipeline is crossing through? And maybe that's a different answer. So just knowing on the whole for the entire world or for the entire country, is it needed? Maybe isn't sufficient in thinking through permitting pipelines. And more specific questions could be asked about, what about the actual communities that are affected by this when we have a leak, when something happens? What about that? Or just by building it and what needs to be removed in order to build? On this topic, who is it necessary for, I would say that this was an important factor in last week's decision by a permitting board in New Hampshire to deny permission to build Northern Pass, an enormous transmission line. So this is electric transmission. Different thing, still got to pull a big thing going, hundreds and hundreds of miles, different dangers associated with it, still really changes the environment of where it is in different ways. This fight about Northern Pass has been going on for 7 years. There still wasn't a permit for it. It's extremely unpopular in New Hampshire. One of the reasons why it's unpopular in New Hampshire, one reason is, wow, it was going right through the White Mountains. Yeah. It was very destructive in what it was going to do. Another reason is that none of the electricity for Northern Pass was stopping and getting off in New Hampshire. It was completely going pass through from Canada to Massachusetts. That didn't help with the public relations around bringing this in terms of who's benefiting from this and who has the cost. Okay, so is it necessary? Gets really close to is it cost effective? In arguing that something's necessary, is it needed? Is it the only way? Is it the best way? Best way in part is it cost effective? So cost can mean a lot of things too. What do I have up now? All you can see is like a blurry fire there. That blurry fire is in West Virginia from a Columbia Gas, natural gas pipeline that exploded. Okay. So cost can mean a few things. Cost can mean the dollar value of what is bought and sold. These are our market costs, right? We'll get to bigger ideas of what cost is in a second. But we're just talking about stuff that can be bought and sold, has a dollar value associated with it. Is it cost effective? Is it the cheapest way to get your energy needs met, or are there cheaper ways? So let's look at that for a second. So I'm going to bring up 3 problems with the way in which it's demonstrated that a pipeline is the most cost-effective solution. The first one is what I'm calling the cost-effectiveness straw man. So The way, and this is the case with the Massachusetts contracts that I'm looking at now, the way that pipelines are often justified is not by what, when you think of cost-benefit analysis, you think you're weighing two things against each other. There's cost and there's benefits. There's two sides to it. This is actually done as a cost-effectiveness analysis when these analyses are presented typically. And so what that means is that it's being assumed that there is a set need, a given need. Here's our need here. Now the question is, what's the cheapest way to meet it? Okay? And when you do the analysis in that way, something gets missed. Okay? So one thing that definitely gets missed in that is kind of an interrogation of the need. Say, what's going on with this need over here? Like we were just talking about, is it really necessary? Are there other ways to meet it? Are there ways that we could, through conservation, reduce the need? We just take the need in this, take the need as given, and then ask what's the best way to meet the need. So closely related to that, this false dilemma, give me pipelines or give me death. So the rhetoric about it is, well, we have this need, it's a fixed need, you have to have it, it's energy, right? This is the stuff that, you know, keeps our lights on, keeps our houses warm. You can either have that or we just won't have the energy. So if you don't give us the pipeline, then the lights are going to go out, or if you don't give us Northern Pass, right, the lights are going to go out, and people will freeze, and there's this dichotomy that's set up, right? These are your choices, pipeline or people freezing to death. Where really that kind of decision point is evidence of not all the alternatives are being considered in the analysis. Right? There are alternatives, and if you're looking at it as an either-or, pipelines or freezing to death, then you're missing the alternatives. Where are the alternatives to the pipeline? Where are the renewables? Where is the conservation and energy efficiency demand response measures that reduce our need at peak time? Where are those things in that kind of false choice? Okay? And the other one is that when these analyses are done, they're done in a way, typically, that puts supply and demand resources on an uneven playing field. What I mean by that, supply resources are stuff that's giving us the energy. So the pipeline, the natural gas, anything that's on that side, bringing us the energy. Demand resource, we don't always think of demand as being a resource. Demand is what we need, right? But there are resources on the demand side, too. There are ways to reduce that demand, either to reduce it over a whole year, to reduce it just at the time when we need the most, when that pinch point is for natural gas, right? When we need the most and there isn't quite enough to go around, maybe, right? Those things like efficiency programs, whether it is insulating our homes or having better thermometers, those kind of things. There are programs called demand response. It's very uncommon on the gas side, but very common in the electric sector, where there are typically large commercial or industrial facilities, although there are some smaller programs that do this with homes. But let's talk about a factory or a commercial facility. They will have signed up and made an arrangement with the utility that if they're called on in a moment when the demand is the greatest, when we're at the peak of our demand, if they're called on, that they'll curtail their demand. And they're paid for it. So it's a way of reducing need at that moment when it's that freezing day in February, and everybody needs natural gas or everybody needs electricity at the same time. Another way to curtail it is to have these business arrangements where, okay, you pay us and we'll not use natural gas right now. We'll shift our production to another time of day or later in the week or what have you. So there are resources on the demand side too. And what happens is that because the need gets treated as given, as set, here it is, we know about this is official and definite, then what gets missed is the demand side resources, where when you were doing modeling that said, okay, what's the least cost way to meet our needs? If you included those in there, then any model that's looking for the cheapest way to do something is going to choose those things because those are our cheapest resources. Energy efficiency is our cheapest resource. Demand response is a very cheap resource, much cheaper than building a new pipeline. Right? But the models that are set up to make the determination of what would be the least cost way to meet our energy needs and can take from piles of this existing pipeline, this new pipeline, this supply of liquefied natural gas that at a peak moment can be vaporized and become the kind of gas that we use. All of those things, the model isn't able to choose, let's have a stronger energy efficiency program, right? Or let's have a program that does demand response at peak. The model doesn't have access to choosing those things. And so when it returns a least cost answer, it's a least cost answer where it didn't have those options, right? And like I was saying up here, there's some kinds of alternatives that aren't in there at all, whether that is doing renewable thermal or what have you. It's missing these. So when we get a response from it that says, here's your least cost answer, it is an answer that's based on incomplete information. So cost can mean a dollar value based on what's bought and sold in the market. It could also be the intrinsic worth to the current generation, right? What is cost? Or it could be an intrinsic worth to current and future generations. Cost could be a bigger idea. And so in economics, we talk about externalities. For all of you who have sat through economics courses and learned about that, so an externality is an external cost. It is a cost that's outside of that kind of dollars, what's being bought and sold in the market. But it's a real cost that people feel and experience and understand as being important to their lives. And that could be climate damages, air and water pollution, health effects, ecosystem effects. These are all things that are important to human communities and may not have a dollar value associated with them. Maybe some do, often don't. But when we're thinking about what something costs, we may want to consider these other kinds of costs, this larger idea of value or of cost. Oh, you can't see these at all, can you? Is that visible at all? It is? Oh, great. Yeah, so this is in West Roxbury. This was the Spectra Energy West Lateral pipeline that was put through Roxbury over the past few years. There were a lot of protests about it. It's in now, but this is one of many protests. It's a business owner from West Roxbury is sitting in the street over the area where the construction crew is trying to come through. And there were a lot of protests right here in Boston regarding building that pipeline. So there are values of pipelines that can't be captured in things you can buy and sell in a market in dollars. Right? There are other values that are going on. Sometimes we try to capture some of those values and include them in analysis by putting a price on them. Right? So the most common example of this is putting a price on carbon, having a carbon cost, a carbon price, and to say, even though we don't buy and sell it usually in a market, that it has this real cost, and that when we're thinking about how much the pipeline costs versus not having the pipeline or versus doing something different in the pipeline that would be better, right? To consider in that, there's an actual cost whenever we release carbon dioxide into the atmosphere, and that should be part of that balancing, right? And we actually do this in a couple of places that are important, and one is it is still the case that for all federal regulation that has the impact of preventing CO2 emissions, part of the cost-benefit analysis that has to be conducted needs to include that carbon cost. And there's an official carbon cost that was set some years ago during the Obama administration. But that rule still exists. That has to be part of the cost-benefit analysis. And so that means that something that reduces carbon emissions has a higher benefit than just its market cost. right? Because we're saying, oh, actually, each ton of carbon that we don't emit is worth something. So we do something similar here in New England. That's a little complicated. Part of the way that we figure out how much energy efficiency programs, how much energy efficiency savings our utilities, both gas and electric, should do, because all of the New England states have various laws about that you need to do energy efficiency. The utilities have to do energy efficiency, but how much? Part of how that's determined is through a study that happens every couple of years. It's called avoided supply cost study. And what they're trying to figure out in that is, okay, if we don't, let's talk about electricity. If we don't use this kilowatt of electricity to light a light or what have you, so we're gonna save it. We're not gonna use it because we had some energy efficiency measure that made that possible, right? Maybe it was actually a kilowatt of electricity for air conditioning, right? And instead of needing it, we insulated our homes really well so that we didn't need quite as much air conditioning. So in order to figure out what the value of that is, part of what you want to know is, well, what would it have cost to produce that kilowatt of electricity? What if we had made the kilowatt of electricity? What would it cost? Because we avoided it, right? That's part of the benefit of the energy efficiency. We avoided that kilowatt hour, so what's it worth? And so this is a complicated energy modeling study that goes on to try to figure out what's it worth not to produce a kilowatt of energy? What's it worth not to produce a therm of natural gas? Right here in New England, using our actual system, everything as accurate as it could be. And part of that study includes placing a price on carbon emissions. So they're there in the study. There's a price placed on carbon emissions in that study, but then each state is permitted to use it however they want. They can make the choice, are we going to use that price or are we not going to use that price in our own decision making? So it's there in the study. It has been there in the study for about the past 10 years. How each state is using it differs. And in Massachusetts, how and whether the state is using that number has been the subject of several of these cases that I was talking about that go before the Utility Commission to talk about what's the right thing to do and get permission from the Utility Commission to do it or not do it. So, all right. That was the end of what I had to say, and I think I'm out of time too, but I'm really happy to take questions. So thank you.
I'll just kick us off real quick. Could you tell us a little bit more about this Utility Commission? How do you get on it? Are you appointed? What is the composition like? What made them give standing in one case and not another case? I'm really curious about the politics of the commission. Okay, so just about every state has a Utility Commission. I can't think of an example where there's not. Some of them have slightly different names. And the things that they're in charge of regulating vary a bit from state to state because the way the energy sectors are set up are different and so forth. Usually the Utility Commission not only regulates electric and natural gas, but also regulates communications and water. So they have this broad range of topics that are brought before them to ask permission. Now all of those things, electric, natural gas, communications, water, they're things where you could see that there are monopolies. Right? So it isn't the case with the electric sector, for example, that any company that wants to produce some electricity over here and bring it to your home can set up wires through the streets and bring it to you, right? That's very heavily regulated, the permissions for having wires and poles, the whole thing. So same with water, communications, with natural gas. Part of that arrangement of getting this monopoly for a particular service territory is that then you're subject to the regulations of the state and of the Utility Commission, and there are all sorts of things that you need to bring to them to get permission for. And in some cases, it's really easy to get that. Some cases, not so much in terms of where the power lays. The Utility Commission in Massachusetts, and this is true in most states, is appointed by the governor. In Massachusetts, there are 3 members of the Utility Commission and it's treated as, the language around it is as if we will always have a two-party system, but one needs to be a Democrat, the other needs to be a Republican, and the third could be whichever. So, typically in a utility commission case in Massachusetts and anywhere, you go and it's a whole courtroom, the whole kind of courtroom setting, but the commissioners aren't actually there. It's overseen by someone whose job it is to do that, who oversees these cases. The witnesses are there, and the lawyers, and the whole drama, very law and order, is going on. But the commissioners typically don't attend. They will have staff, so the Utility Commission has a large staff in Massachusetts and elsewhere, and their staff will attend for them and will sometimes ask questions and get involved in that way. From all of that, staff, together with that person who's overseeing the case, will write a recommendation to the commission. Here's what we recommend that you do about this matter before you. And then the commission will make a decision from that. Occasionally, commissioners will show up and will get directly involved. And I've also had that been in states where I testified where it was just normal for the commissioners to show up. But I think in larger states, it's much less so. They have a lot of business in front of them. What were your other questions about it? Like, how do you get on the, I guess you got into the governor. I don't know.
So for example, are three commissioners necessarily all appointed by Governor Baker? Do they transition with each election, or is it that they're a fixed term and then when it's the next governor's?
That's a really good question. I don't think there is a fixed term, but I'm not sure. If anybody knows and can correct me, I hadn't thought about that.
It's okay.
All of the other commissioners of agencies of Massachusetts agencies change with the administration, or it's subject to the governor's decision about who's going to be in those positions. With the Utility Commission, my thought was that it's the same. It's possible that they have terms, though, and that I'm not aware of it.
But I'll just sort of tack on. So you had mentioned earlier in your talk that CLF got standing in this case, but not in the previous case. Do you have a sense of why they get standing in some cases or not? It felt a little bit like whimsical, decision making, but you might actually understand when they would give CLF, Conservation Law Foundation, standing or not.
That's a good question. This happens probably, this issue for the advocates happens a fair amount all throughout the United States, where that advocacy group will come to the commission. So there's some matter before the commission. Somebody's requesting permission to build a new generation plant, or to sign a supply contract, or to one thing or another. And either an environmental advocacy group or a consumer advocacy group will feel like this is important to them, to their constituents, and will want to be able to get involved and to put their views in front of it. And that's what interveners do to it. If there weren't any interveners, then the only views would be the views of the petitioner. So the petitioner is the utility or whoever is making the request. They go and put their testimony, put their witnesses. If nobody intervenes, then the staff of the Utility Commission can ask questions, but that's all the parties that are there, right? So the whole system relies for balance on people intervening in it, and individuals can intervene as well as organizations, but you do have to ask for standing. You have to ask for permission to get involved. And very frequently and kind of capriciously, both individuals and advocacy organizations are denied standing. So is there always a great reason for that? Maybe not, but you do have to make your case to show why this is important. Some advocacy organizations typically do this. Like, for example, if a big national environmental advocacy organization wants to intervene in a utility docket, like Sierra Club, then often what they'll do is they have members all over the United States, and so they'll get members, one or more members, that are very obviously directly affected, and get them to testify or get them to be part of making the case that Sierra Club's members should have standing in this. So they try to leverage their very big base in doing that. CLF doesn't usually do that, and CLF gets standing in lots and lots of cases. But historically, the advocates have not been given standing in, the environmental advocates have not been given standing in these natural gas forecasting cases. Yeah, I don't know I think that they should be given standing in it, and I think that a lot more scrutiny should be made of these predictions, and I would love to do that. Usually the consumer advocates do get standing. So this is another piece of it. The consumer advocates, almost every state has a consumer advocate. And some consumer advocates are governmental agencies of their own. Some are completely independent. And some are part of the Attorney General's office. And that's how it is in Massachusetts. Our consumer advocate is actually a wing of the Attorney General's office. And so they, too, intervene in utility dockets. I don't know if they ever get denied standing, but they're frequent interveners in these cases. They will also hire witnesses, sometimes folks like me, to testify on their behalf, giving an opinion about how this, whatever was petitioned for, how it's going to affect the consumer. And sometimes the consumer advocates and the environmental advocates are on the same page. Sometimes they want two different things. It just depends. I'm going to go around. Yeah?
Oh, I'll ask a question while I walk there. Thank you for a very, very informative talk. And I was wondering, I think these are great projects, and I think it's a great opportunity for students who are interested in advocacy to channel their passion through, to apply from a different perspective. And I was wondering if you could tell us a little more of the kind of work you do with graduate students and undergrads, and how can they get involved with the Applied Economics Clinic?
Mm-hmm. So first, just to clarify, and this is something really important that comes up in our work all the time, a question about it. We're not advocates. We are technical experts. We give our unbiased technical expertise. So we begin with a question, and we work as impartially as we can to answer that question. That's how we do our work. So when we write about it, we're not writing about it from an advocate standpoint. We leave that to our clients to do. And there are definitely times when somebody calls me up to ask me to do something, and I say, I really, really need you to understand that when I do that, I'm not sure how the answer is going to come out, right? So it's very important that the clients that are asking me for work understand that my answer after analyzing a problem could be, wow, that's a great idea, or wow, that's a terrible idea, and I need to give my honest answer. What we say about it is, if you want us to lie, you're going to have to pay us a whole lot more. So people with very nice suits can afford to get paid a whole lot more and say just about anything, but we're just there to give our honest understanding as technical experts. So we do hire research assistants, and they help us out on all of our projects. So they are working on, acting as assistants on research, on doing analysis, what have you. So, we're hiring usually new folks each semester, and are happy to take applications, or if people have specific questions about that, I can answer.
So my question is about labor. Do labor questions come up? I think they do. No, it's just that people aren't lying. Oh, sorry. Do labor questions come up in terms of, the economic impacts of a gas line? I mean, like the Keystone, of course, is being used to say it's jobs. So do those typically come up in the Utility Commission, or is that more off the side and public agenda kind of thing that goes on? It's rather hard to say, will it generate jobs or not? I mean, you talk about other externalities, hard to put a price on it. But I mean, do they typically answer that question in the Utility Commission hearing?
They don't answer the question, but it's a very common argument that's made for building new infrastructure, whether that's a pipeline or a generation facility or what have you, that part of the benefits that the company that wants to build that will put forward is, look, this is going to create a lot of jobs. It's very, very typical. And so, yes, definitely in our line of work, we end up looking at that critically to say, is this the case? Do we believe it's the case that this will actually create jobs or not? Or is the prediction that they've given, do we think it's of the right magnitude? And that evidence may be presented before a utility commission, but there's lots of things that get presented before the utility commission or become part of those arguments that in the end, what the commission is going to say is, this is not part of our mandate. We have a specific mandate, us, the utility commission, for how we need to decide things, right? And we're going to look at that and make our decision. And so this happened to me, this specific issue happened to me, not on jobs, but on emissions, where I was testifying about a new natural gas pipeline that was going to be built up in Vermont, and presented arguments about the emissions impact of bringing in this new source of gas and how that wasn't really consistent with Vermont's climate law. And what the Utility Commission said about my testimony was that that's nice, but it's not in our mandate. Vermont's climate law is not part of us, the Utility Commission's mandate. So something like that could easily be said about jobs. Like that's nice information, but our mandate, the Utility Commission, is to keep the lights on, right? Or whatever is set up for that state of being actually their responsibility.
I also had a question about sort of the externalities that you were talking about, the externalities. How do things that differ so greatly in their sort of analysis of cost, so like human health or ecosystem services or ecosystem damage, how do you go about putting them on the same sort of unit so that you can compare across the financial costs and then the human health costs or the ecosystem service costs? Are those more like qualitative, or do they actually get converted into like money figures that you can compare?
That's a great question, and it's done in different ways. Yes, very commonly, different kinds of costs that are not things that could be bought and sold in a market, the existence of species or ecosystems, human health, things like this are transformed into dollars to be included in cost-benefit analysis. You see this in almost every cost-benefit analysis that's used to justify an EPA regulation, are those kinds of benefits calculations where they are turned into dollars. And there is a lot to be said to critique that kind of process, and it can certainly get into a questionable moral area where it's very common in those to see a value of a statistical life. So if something is expected to cause deaths, then a certain amount of money is put in to represent not doing that, the benefit of that. And I've looked at a lot of those and seen a lot of questionable practices in it. Important thing to remember about it, though, so like I could go on all day about questionable practices and taking things that are of intrinsic value and turning them into dollars. The problem with it is, though, that when you see one of these enormous EPA cost-benefit analysis justifying a new regulation or putting, usually what happens with EPA regulations is they'll have 5 or 10 versions of it and then talk about which one of these should we do, the most stringent, the least stringent, which one makes sense. So that cost-benefit analysis is weighing in on that. One of the big problems is that EPA will, and others, not just EPA, will set up a big list of all the possible costs of doing something, all the possible benefits of doing something. And the costs of doing it are pretty easy to calculate. Yeah, we're predicting the future. That's difficult. Usually predictions like that are kind of inflated. but it's engineering costs. You can look at what are the engineering costs of this to actually build this thing, to do this thing. And then on the other side, the benefits of, or you doing one thing or doing another thing, but the benefits are usually avoiding something, right? What was avoided? Well, avoiding doing damage to species, ecosystems, human health, taking human lives, all sorts of things like that. Wow, that's really difficult. And they'll make a really long list of it and discuss a lot of different things, but they'll only put dollar values on some of them. And on other ones, they'll say, well, we just don't know what to do. And so what you get is a partial accounting of the benefits on one side and a very complete accounting of the costs on the other. And so you always have this imbalance. And so to me, it points to the exercise itself being flawed. It's really difficult to put dollar signs on those things. Yes, it actually is. But anytime, once we've launched down that path, okay, we're going to weigh everything, make dollar signs for everything, and then weigh it. If for some of them you say, wait, that was too difficult, I'm not going to do that one, then what you're doing for the purposes of the exercise is giving it a value of 0. Right? Within the exercise, you've assigned a value of 0 to it, which isn't really what you meant to do. So there's a lot of problems with it. But yeah, it happens all the time. Since the Reagan administration, federal regulations have all had to have a cost-benefit analysis associated with them, and they're happening everywhere all the time. Oh, thank you.